Over the last 3 years, the Sahel has shifted dramatically. Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger have publicly broken ties with France and moved closer to alternative partners. French troops have left Niger, Burkina Faso, and deepened security ties with Russia and pushed national languages over French. And even Senegal, without a coup, has reclaimed French military bases. Today, I want to interview the former permanent secretary of Nigeria's Ministry of Foreign Affairs to hear what he says about these changes. In the last few years, we've seen coups shake Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger. Some people call it a rejection of democracy that has failed to deliver, while others say it's a dangerous setback for the West African region. Now, with your diplomatic background, how do you see it?
No, I do not really think. I think we have to isolate these issues and try to understand the internal crisis within each of these states that led to the military coup and things like that. It is not so much a failure of democracy as much as a failure of leadership. I think in a number of these countries, it was the failure of leadership. The failure of leadership to address some of the crises in those countries that eventually led to the coup. So we must separate this failure of leadership and the failure of democracy.
Okay. You mentioned crisis. What do you think is the major crisis these regions are facing, these countries are facing? Could it be insurgencies or economic?
Partly insurgency, partly economic, but the insurgency also has a connection with the insurgency. It's like when you look at our country now, how do you explain that we have a military that has distinguished itself in places like Liberia and Sierra Leone, and then for the last almost 15 years, they've not been able to deal with some ragtag characters that are destabilizing the country. And every now and then, you begin to see that the problem is spreading. There's reports circulating about what is going on in Kogi and Kwara. So you can imagine where it started from, and it just gradually. And you begin to ask yourself, where are our security forces? Where is the military doing, and the rest of it? So, if these people, if for example it happens in Nigeria, of course, it's not a failure of democracy, but the failure of leadership to perceive and deal with the situation that eventually led to the collapse of government in these places.
Okay. So the failure of leadership has led many youths, many young people in these countries, Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso, to actually celebrate these coups. Now, how worrying is this disillusionment with democracy among the youths?
Can I tell you what is interesting?
Yes.
If a coup happens in Nigeria today, Nigerians will celebrate. It's been the pattern. Only for them to turn around and begin to regret that it has happened. Again, it goes back. The question you should ask is, why did the youths and the people celebrate? Because they were fed up with the leadership. Because they were dissatisfied with the previous leadership. And because the previous leadership itself was not committed to democracy, neither were they committed to addressing the fundamental issues of insecurity in their respective countries.
Okay, thank you. So now, do you think this wave of military regimes could trigger a domino effect across the West African region and even Africa at large? Or are we already seeing the peak of it?
No, I do not think so. I do not think so. It was in the 60s that there was a domino effect. And that was because the Western world also joined in justifying military coup. They talked about the essence of strong leadership, holding multilateral, multicultural states together. And they thought that because the military was seen as a nationalist body or institution, they were in a better position to hold the nations, together, and they justify it. In fact, there's a book I always tell people to read, which was a book that celebrated military rule in the world. It's called The Men on Horseback. It justified the need for a strong man at the helm of affairs in countries like Nigeria, where you have multicultural communities struggling for power, influence, and the rest of it. So I really do not think that that there will be a domino effect, because today it will be opposed. It will be opposed by the global community. You see, why there was not much interest in places like Burkina Faso and Guinea, Mali, and the rest of them, because these are, whether we like to admit it or not, these are relatively small countries to a large extent of probably no consequence to a number of these countries, maybe with the exception of Niger that sells uranium to the rest of the world. So as long as they can still continue to buy their uranium, they're not bothered.
Okay. Now, could this region be a new playground for the big powers? Why? Because Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, even Senegal, without coup, they all kick out the French forces. And recently, Burkina Faso has been seen moving closer to Russia. So do you think there's a shift in foreign dependence and international dependence?
Not really. I'm not saying, and I'm not oblivious of the fact that foreign players would like to be involved in Africa and the rest of it. But the Russians have never made any serious impacts in terms of fighting for Africa. No. They've been helpful in a number of areas, But to go all out, let me just give you an example. Before we, Africa, got to know China, we knew Russia first. At the time we knew Russia, when Russia was swept superpower, we just knew Russia ideologically, because it was then under Chairman Mao Zedong and the rest of it. And for when Chairman Mao died, I think for about 20 years, no, before he died, for 20 years, there was a kind of revolution going on in China and the rest of it. And Africa was not too familiar with China. But today, when you make a comparison between the Chinese involvement in Africa and the Russian involvement in Africa, you find out that the gap is so wide, because the Chinese are all over Africa, particularly focusing on economic development, granting loans to African countries, and the rest of them. While the Russians have not been a kind of critical player within the African, region. But I'm not saying they've not been involved, but they do not have as much influence as the Chinese have today.
Okay. So now, just yesterday, intelligence agencies from Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger say they are preparing to reveal names of senior politicians in Nigeria alleged to be supporting bandit groups operating in Nigeria's northwest. This was according to a security analyst, Dagazola Makama. What is your say on this?
Would that not be wonderful if they can help us? If they can help us, I think this country will be eternally grateful. One of my major complaints very often is that of all the crises I know and I'm familiar with in the world, this is the only crisis where you have no knowledge of the sponsors, you have no discernible information where they get their crisis. It's all speculative. You really have no understanding of the people involved. And in the whole process, we have security agencies that are supposed to unearth. Nobody has been ever brought to trial. Nobody has shown up as a financier. Once a time, they said, they called the fellow supplying petrol to Boko Haram. Nobody heard of the trial. At one point, we see videos of Boko Haram in brand new Jeep, bought from Nigeria. So there are so many mysteries, quote and unquote, about the insecurity in Nigeria that is so difficult to explain. But I'll end this part of the question by answering the way Abacha said it a couple of years ago, that if insecurity lasted more than 3 or so months, be aware that government is behind it. Not necessarily that like people sitting in Aso Rock and so on, no. But there's certainly, government is an omnibus, is wide and so on. So there must be people in government, within government, that it has a hand in it. Remember when Boko Haram happened? I mean, not Boko Haram, when the Chibok girls were, look at the way it was so, lackadaisically treated. The current vice president, for example, while Nigerians were trying to figure out exactly what happened, he flew to London to grant an interview to Amanpo. And you begin to wonder exactly, was that necessary? You left your own state that was in crisis just to do a 10-minute interview. So it shows you that there was something funny going on about it all. So no, particularly the big guys in Borno, they know the truth. But because the security forces and the government itself, successive government, are not serious, are insincere, the whole thing has festered till where we are today. And you can see part of the cost of food inflation is the insecurity in the country. And that's the honest truth. And until they can get the insecurity, and reorganize the security forces, I'm not too sure we can solve this problem. Look, a couple of decades ago, India had a problem with food supply. Very, very bad. And the world, particularly the advanced world, they just sent in food aid to India. Indira Gandhi was the prime minister at that time. And she swore that India will never ask for food aid again. Today, India is self-sufficient in the production of food. So if our leaders can invest in the main triggers of development, education, health, agriculture, science, and today, science and technology, we'll be fine. We will be fine. All these that we are saying, we have stabilized the economy, we have stabilized the exchange rate, is benefiting the upper class and those who have dollar to go and do business. But the real people on the streets cannot live on what you call trickle-down economics, that did not, fundamentally change their lives. So if you focus on the triggers of development, look, a country where you have 133 million people dimensionally poor, it's a country in crisis. So when we sit down in Abuja and release figures and rejoice, the economy, the inflation is coming down at 20-something percent. In some African countries and some parts of the world, it's less than 2, 3, 4, 5%. And all these people that are saying inflation is coming down, I challenge you, you're a journalist, try and focus on one shop. Okay. Go and buy one product like foodstuff. Just take tomatoes. Go and pay for, all those tomatoes they packet in the food shop. Buy it this week. Go back next week and buy that same amount of tomatoes. You will see that the tomato you bought for 1,500 has become 200. In another 2 weeks, it is 2,500. You understand what I'm saying? So it's for the leaders just to do the right thing. If the leaders do not know what to do, I have a mantra that I used to share with friends. I said, listen, if you do not know what to do, watch television. If you sit down during, like tomorrow is a national holiday, if you sit down, put on your television and just scroll through and watch a number of stations, particularly those documentary stations, even Animal Kingdom, watch them. You'll be amazed what you will learn. But what I'm trying to say in effect is that, look, if our leaders do not know what to do, the United Nations has what they call the Sustainable Development Goal. It came about from the Millennium Development Goal, in which that Millennium Development Goal identifies some of the things that the world should do. Nigeria never met its own target. We have Sustainable Development Goal. I'm not even sure that any government at the state or federal level is even looking at that. So I'm saying if they do not know what to do, let them just take that document and say, okay, these are the things that will help us. Let's see whether we can, you don't understand, we can do some of these things. If you take education, for one of those things I find very interesting in education, and I'm not sure that most Nigerians do realize this. We complain that the federal government budget is not up to 26% that the United Nations recommends should be what we spend on education. But I argue that if you do an analysis of the money voted by the federal government, the state government, UBEC, this other one that NEF fund or whatever, then you have that one that supports the university. We're probably spending more than 26% on education. Then the problem is, then the question now becomes, where exactly does all this money go to?
Okay. Thank you, sir, for that insight. Now, for my final question to you, what message will you give to West Africans, especially the young people who feel democracy has failed them?
No, democracy has not failed them. Their leaders have failed them. And they should stand up and ready to vote out those leaders. Look, let them continue to vote out the leaders. One day, they will get it right. That's what the rest of the world are doing. You understand what I'm saying? So if leader A is not doing well, don't be sentimental. Don't say, like we say here, it's the turn of my tribe. Vote out the leaders you think are not doing well and are not satisfying you. Try another leader. It could be your humble self. If you are not doing well, they vote you out. By the time you vote out 1, 2, 3, guess what? The political system will begin to stabilize because any leader who really wants to. That's number one. Number two, it is time we begin to bring our leaders to trial, particularly on the issues of corruption. There must be consequences, not just for leaders as presidents, but for people across board in the system who abuse the system, who promote corruption. When you begin to deal with all these social issues as well in government, when you cut the cost of governance, for example, and the rest of them, when you build trust, because it's also a matter of trust, the people will like you. But if the people do not want you, for goodness sake, vote them out. And if they refuse, fight for it. Look, let me tell you something. All what we are enjoying today, some people fought for it. Some people died for it. So we cannot sit down and think that, because it's my brother, I won't say anything. No, because at the end of the day, you are punishing yourself as well. If you go to the market, nobody will send to you, no Yoruba man, for example, will sell bread to you at a lower price because you are Yoruba. Or would an Igbo man come and do work in your house and charge you less because you are Igbo? No, would the Hausa man sell his cattle today less than $1 million because you are Hausa or Fulani? No. They will sell at market price, for goodness sake. So we all go to the same market. We all buy the same thing. There's no way you send your kids to school anywhere in this country and the principal is Igbo and he says that every Igbo man who brings a child will pay less and others will pay more. No. So we are all suffering the same thing. Yeah, it's just that the level of suffering is different, but we're all suffering the same thing.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much, sir, for having us and giving us your insightful insights today, sir. They were really appreciate. Well, once again, I'm Farouk Mohammed, bringing you news from around the globe.